Hi, and welcome back to the FreeFormKnits YouTube channel. I'm Haxann Evers, a Knit and Crochet who's proven ways of crafting both worlds design. All the places you can find me below listed right down below this video. This is my channel where I talk about knitting, crochet, designs, all that fun crafty stuff, so if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. The title of this video is 5 sock questions I have. So I have been knitting socks for a very long time. I don't know how long, very long time. And I know when I started sock knitting, there were some things that seemed very common to other sock knitters that I, as a beginner, didn't know why they were so common. And so the topic of this video is going to be 5 questions that I had as a beginner that they may seem obvious to you if you are an experienced sock knitter, but if you're a beginner, hopefully there is something here that explains something to you, makes it clear why we do the things we do as sock knitters. So the questions I'm going to cover in this video are: why that number of stitches? Why a heel flap? How long does the heel flap have to be? How many stitches does the heel turn have to happen across? And how do you know when to start decreasing for your toe? These are 5 questions that bothered me as a sock knitter when I first began knitting socks, and I want to answer them here if you are a beginner sock knitter like I was and are struggling with these questions. So that's what we're going to get into. You have my notes here on my laptop, so if you do see me looking down, that is why. I just want to make sure I don't forget anything. Everything I talk about in this video will also be available on my blog as a blog post, so if you want to check that out, if you want to have that as a reference sheet. Let's get started. I love talking about socks. So question number 1, why that number of stitches? So if you are starting out as a sock knitter, you might have come across some free sock patterns and everything, and most sock patterns really have 3 main sizes. They might have some more, but usually it's just the 3, a 56 sock, 64, and 72. Now I know when I was doing as a beginner sock knitter, I was still kind of a new knitter, and so like gauge and needle size, that kind of all didn't make quite a lot of sense to me. So I just kept seeing these stitch counts and wondered why across every sock pattern I came across, why these numbers? Why? The answer to that is that those stitch counts taken at the approximate gauge, the most common gauge for socks at 8 stitches per inch, those stitch counts equal the common foot circumferences of 7, 8, and 9 inches in circumference. So obviously with socks, just like with any project, you can play with your gauge and you can get different amounts of how big you want your socks to be, but typically the recommended gauge for sock patterns is about 8 stitches per inch, and so 8 divided by any of those numbers, that equals 7, 8, and 9 inches in circumference. Now if you hear that, like my socks are supposed to be only like that many inches in circumference, if that doesn't seem right to you, like if you measure your foot, you have to also remember socks are meant to be knit with negative ease, which means that their finished measurement is going to be less than what they are intended to fit. So like for my foot, if I measure my foot is about 9.5 inches at its widest point. I typically knit socks at 64 stitches, which makes me an 8-inch sock. Because that has the negative ease, it's going to keep that sock on my foot. A sock isn't really like a hat where it's like, I can keep it on well. Like my socks, you're walking around, you're wearing shoes, so you want them to be tighter than your actual foot measurement so that they will stay on. But just like with any project, you play around with it. You decide how much negative ease you want. Maybe you want like baggier socks, like house socks. You can do anything you want. That's why those stitch counts, because they work. They're very common general foot circumferences. Question number 2 is why a heel flap? The heel flap and gusset is a very common heel construction. It's usually what every first sock knitter does as their first heel, and I know it's what I did because I just didn't know any better. I didn't know any other type of heel construction. I just thought that's how you do a heel, but there are many different types of heels. But I knew when I was knitting the heel flap and gusset, I followed a tutorial for it, like a whole tutorial for knitting socks, and I followed it step by step. But as I was knitting this heel flap, I was like, what is this for? I could not wrap my brain around how this heel flap was going to serve me in the purpose of making my sock. So I now, as an experienced sock knitter who's knit different types of heels and understands sock construction better, now know the answer. I'm going to share it with you. So how a sock is done? A sock is essentially a tube. It's just a tube. You have a little bit of ribbing at the top of it, like as a brim, like you would have for a hat. It's just a little cuff. You do a long tube, and then over on half of that, you have your stitch circumference. You will do a little bit of extra knitting to make a heel, because how your sock is shaped, and here I have a pair of socks. I can actually grab my blockers. So here is a sock. It is just a tube, and then you knit down the tube, and then over half your number of stitches you're going to do a heel. And this is my heel. It's not a heel flap and gusset, but it does have a gusset within it. So behind a heel flap is that it gives you a little bit more depth to your heel. A lot of common problems with heel constructions that are not heel flap and gusset is that the heel isn't deep enough. So what the heel flap does is it creates a little bit more length on the back of the sock so that it's a perfect spot. It makes a nice little pocket when you turn your heel to put your heel in, so it fits better. It really just creates I kind of think of it as a little hallway for your heel. It just adds a little bit more depth so that your sock will fit better. Also, a great thing about a heel flap, whether you do a heel flap and gusset or a different type of heel with a heel flap, is that you can do, I didn't do it for this sock, but you can do a little bit of a tighter patterning, like a slip stitch pattern, which will not only cling to the back of your foot to make it a better fit, but also will be a nice spot to add, because that's the part of your foot that's going to be like in a shoe or anything. So it's great to kind of like protect the sock and be a bit more tougher area so it doesn't wear out quicker. And that's why we do heel flaps, because it adds depth, and it's also a great spot to take advantage of to add a little bit more toughness to your sock. So my next question as a beginner sock knitter, again regarding the heel flap and gusset construction, was, okay, I have to do a heel flap. How long does it have to be? I know when I was knitting my first sock, I was following a pattern, and I could see I was doing the, I believe I did the 64 stitch size, and I saw for my size for heel flap and gusset I had to make the heel flap a certain number of rows. And I looked at the other sizes in the pattern, and I wondered, well, their depth was, they had to do their heel flaps at a different rate than mine. Why is that? Why is every size heel flap different? And the answer to that is, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be different. The reason that it is typically different for heel flap and gusset construction in a sock pattern is because how they get that heel flap measurement has to do with what size you're making. So again, with the sizes of 56 stitch sock, 64 stitch sock, and 72 stitch sock, how they get each of those individual measurements has to do with what they are making their heel across. So I was doing the 64 stitch sock, which meant my heel turn was happening across half of that number, which is 32 stitches. My heel flap was going to be as many rows as half that number. So 32 divided by 2 equals 16. I was going to do my heel flap for 16 rows. If I had been doing the 56 stitch sock, I would have been working my heel across half of that, which is 28, and half of that is 14. So I would have done my heel flap over 14 rows. A 72 stitch sock, half of 72 is 36, half of 36 is 18, so my heel flap would have been 18 rows. Now, these are all standards. I know for me, I don't do heel flap and gusset heels anymore. It wasn't my cup of tea, and they don't fit me right, and I just didn't enjoy the process of doing them. For heel flap and gussets, those are the standard rows. Maybe you do a heel flap and you realize 16 heel flap rows is too long for you and the 64 sock, or maybe you do a 56 sock and realize 14 rows for a heel flap is too short for you. It's really just a jumping board, these numbers. They are standard foot sizes. All feet are very different. Feet are very different. When you make socks, you'll learn that pretty quickly. What's comfortable for you to wear as a sock might not be comfortable for somebody else. And especially in the terms of heels, there are so many different heel constructions, so many different ways to tweak existing heel constructions. You really just have to experiment and find what works for you. But that is why in a pattern, That's where they get their numbers, those standard heel flap rows. Question number 4, how many stitches does the heel turn have to happen across? Now, the answer to this is a little bit complicated. So depending on the type of heel you are making, this answer will vary. There are so many different types of heels construction, so many. There's the heel flap and gusset, there's the afterthought heel, a fish lips kiss, a new depth heel, German short row heel, shortcut heel, so many different types of heels. So many. Shadow wrap heel, I've seen that heel. So many different types of heels. And really, as a new sock knitter, it can be overwhelming. Like, it's like, what do I do? Which one do I pick? But when you get into sock knitting, it's really so exciting that there are so many different types of heels you can do and experiment. And yeah, but it can be overwhelming at first. And I know when I was a beginner sock knitter doing a sock pattern, I was like, well, why am I doing it this way? Why? So I'm going to share with you something that kind of helped me understand it and me not panic looking at a new heel pattern and be like, oh, what is this about? What is the goal here? Usually, the goal for a heel is at its deepest point to be approximately 1/3 of your heel stitch count, usually. So, for instance, an afterthought heel. An afterthought heel is basically toe decreases done on the heel of a sock. You can either do it, you can either plan for it or you can cut it in later. But when you pick up those stitches and you decrease for your heel, you're decreasing down to 1/3 of your stitch count, approximately. So let's just pretend that this is an afterthought heel. It's not, but we can pretend at this deepest point, you're decreasing down to about 1/3 of your full stitch count. So this full stitch count was a 64 stitch sock. If this went afterthought heel, I would have decreased down to 12. Would have decreased down to 12 stitches, which is approximately 1/3 of my heel stitch count, 32 approximately. It's give or take 12 with fingering weight, 12 stitches with fingering weight yarn. Doing a sock pattern is kind of like the sweet stitch count number. And again, it's all subjective. It all depends on what you're going for, your fit. As a beginner sock knitter, I know as a beginner sock knitter, you want a clear-cut, like, basic answer. But with heel turns and heel depths, it all just depends on your foot, on your heel. But this 1/3 rule just helped me kind of understand what each heel construction I was doing was going for. And it was going for the desired depth of your heel. So that's how many stitches you want to get to. It's not necessarily, I know with the heel flap and gusset, when you do your heel turn itself, you're working across a certain number of stitches, and that's all subjective to what type of heel you're doing, because even within heel flap and gusset construction, there are different types of heel turns you can do. There's short row, there's I believe there's French heel, just a lot of different. But that little trick of you want your heel turn to reach a certain depth for your heel, and that depth is going to equal approximately 1/3 of your heel stitch count. It just kind of helped me understand what I was doing, because when I knit, especially when I'm knitting something new, I want to know the goal. I want to know the goal. I want to work toward the goal, and that was really hard for me to do a heel and not understand what the goal was of the heel. I mean, I know it's to turn the work, it's to turn a corner so I can knit the foot, but what is the goal for that heel individually? Like, how is that heel supposed to fit? And this rule of approximately 1/3 of that stitch count kind of helped me make sense of what I was doing. So hopefully it helps you make sense. If not, I apologize for complicating it for you, but that's what helped me make sense of heel construction. The last question is, when do you start decreasing for the toe? Now, here's my easy answer that I still use to this day. When you try your sock on, if it covers your little toe, then you're ready to decrease for the toe. That's it. That's my little tip. When you put your sock on, you're about here, and it covers your pinky toe, you're ready for decreasing. Now, it's great if you're doing a standard toe like here. This is kind of like a standard toe shape, this decreasing. If you're doing a rounded toe, they tend to be a little bit shorter, such as this sock here. And so if I were doing a rounded toe, I typically, when it reaches when I put it on and my work covers the knuckle on my big toe, then I know I'm ready to do my rounded toe. But as handy as this tool is to avoid having to actually measure when we could be knitting, but as handy as that tool is, sometimes you're knitting socks for someone else and you can't just try it on them because that's kind of weird, especially if it's a surprise. So there is a more practical, more mathematically correct way to measure when you should be decreasing for your toe. How you want to do it is want to measure your foot from heel to toe. If you are making a gift for a recipient, you can Google their shoe size, Google the measurements for that foot size. It'll give you the length of their toe, and then you want to subtract how long your toe is going to be from that measurement. So what you want to do is want to measure your foot from heel to toe, and then you want to subtract your toe measurement. What your toe measurement is going to be is going to depend on what type of toe you're going to do. For instance, if you're doing this standard toe or this rounded toe, they are a little bit different in how long they are. If you're unsure, you can measure the toe. You can see in the pattern how many rows your toe is and measure your row gauge for that and do the math to figure out how long your toe is going to be. A good rule of thumb, again, I really like my approximations, is about 2 inches. I would say 2 inches for every toe, or 1.5, around there. Socks, again, are meant to be knit with negative ease, so if they are a little bit shorter than they should be, it's okay, just a little bit, not too much. And you're going to subtract that toe measurement from your foot. And once you do that, you're going to multiply that new number by your row gauge or your round gauge, because you're knitting the sock typically in the round. So let's say the person I'm making socks for wears a shoe size of a US 7. So I Googled the measurements for that. It's about 9 inches, and my toe is about 2 inches. So I'm going to subtract 2 from 9, I get 7. And my round gauge for my sock, which means how many rounds I have to do to equal 1 inch of knitted fabric, I'm going to say that's about 8 inches. 8 rounds of knitting to do 1 inch of knitted fabric. So 9 minus 2 equals 7. 7 times 8 equals 56. So I'm going to have to knit 56 rounds before my toe, and then I add my toe decreases, and that should equal a 9 inch long foot, which will be a US woman's size 7. Now, I know there is some confusion about when do you measure for a knitted sock? When should you measure the foot? Does it start, for instance, I'll show you on this sock because I did a garter stitch heel, so it's a little bit easier to see. Do I start measuring my foot here at the back of the heel to here? Does this equal my foot measurement? Or does it start after the heel, right here? And did this equal my foot measurement? And you're not going to like this answer. Again, it's personal preference, I find. When I measure my knitted socks, when I measure my foot rounds, I start after the heel. So I would start here to here. I did a little stripe here, so it looks like it's part of the toe, but it's actually not. This is what my round is. So if I were knitting the pattern we just talked about, 56 rounds, I would start counting my 56 rounds here. Now, there's not a lot of difference between here. Again, socks are made to be knit with negative ease, so they're supposed to be a little bit smaller so that they are a bit tighter on your foot. And it's, again, personal preference. I know some knitters, they count the heel rows as part of their foot measurement. I personally find that it's better to count after the heel, and that way you can do fewer rounds for your sock, and then the heel can kind of make up for it, and you get that stretch, which will keep the sock on your foot. But it's a lot of trial and error. It all comes down to personal preference. 5 sock questions I had as a beginner sock knitter. I know I said a lot that, it comes down to personal preference and trial and error, and the only way you're going to find out your personal sock recipe, which fits your foot, is through trial and error, and that can be really overwhelming as a beginner. There are so many sock patterns out there, so many geared toward beginner knitters, and so many tutorials, so many, and it can be overwhelming, but I hope this video helped you a little bit. Hope it gave you some things to think about. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to help you. Sock knitting is so much fun. It's just so amazing to be able to knit up these beautiful skeins of yarn into socks, to gift them, to try new things out on them, whether it be some stripes or texture. It's just so much fun. So there are lots of different heel patterns, different stitch patterns to do on socks, so many things. So anything I can do to help you, I would love to be of service. You can check out my sock patterns in my Ravelry shop, which will be linked down below. And like I said, any questions, please leave them in the comments. I would love to help you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy crafting!